Metaverse.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and this is a very special episode because we are here at Federation University and we are working on the carbon fiber sword, which is it's a very interesting project, really fun, but quite complex. And we've already had a lot of help by an expert here, and now we're on site with that expert. James, come and say hi, mate. So this is James, and you would know all about carbon fiber.
Know all about carbon fiber and a whole bunch of other composites. Other materials we're using in here, such as Dylan, Anegra, glass, Kevlar is another one. I think it's a very special material. We don't sort of talk about enough, but everyone knows it obviously is body armor, and we were just having a bit of a play with it off camera. And I think that's very interesting. We could do some stuff with that in future potentially.
It's really exciting. So James actually reached out to us after our carbon fiber blade video and offered his assistance. And so we've been working with him back and forth, collaborating, and we have a first stage prototype which has some interesting things that you want to point out and share with us, which is right here. So tell us a little bit about this right here, James.
So this is a rough sample of the sword. So this was a infused carbon fiber with just a single thin soric core in the middle and a couple little blade segments you provided. So this one's all made out of our scrap material. So at the end of the year, our students we end up with a lot of leftover bits. And those leftover bits, I said, look, I'm happy to do some more training, some filming. So this has worked well for us in the background. And so we made this sword along the way.
Now, this was to my initial design and I guess, I forgot the word. My initial design and measurements, I guess. And what's really interesting about when you take a design and then put it into practical application, you get to see, okay, certain changes that might need to be made. And James, you pointed something out rather interesting about this one. That it's a little floppy.
It's very floppy.
Although, like, sharpened up, I think this would actually cut.
I think it would cut quite well, yes.
Because you've actually built it. If we come in close, there is a spring steel blade right in the middle, like in the exact spot that we have here. And so there's a couple of things that we could do to try and make it a bit more rigid. One, we could make it shorter. So one of the design philosophies I was thinking of, because carbon fiber is so light, we could get away with it being a bit longer than the average longsword, and that means you would get a massive reach advantage. And already, like, Tyrus, do you want to come and have a feel of just the weight of this in like yes, it's floppy, we get that.
Just saying, Chad. I remember how we had those discussions about structural rigidity.
Yes.
And maybe adding something on the outside, just so we wouldn't get this.
And the reason why I was against it, we don't want the blade to be too thick, otherwise that would get in the way of cutting. But handle it like just up and down and feel the weight. How crazy light is that?
It's good. It's good.
Yeah.
In the initial conversations, James, you said to use a foam core. Does this one have a foam core?
It has a very, very thin, single 1.5 mil thick core. Now, when we spoke, I suggested like getting the proper rigidity is going to be very difficult in something so thin based on your original design. But that's not my call. It's your call. You're one's designing it. And if I just say, well, you build it this way, then I'm taking over your project, and that's not fair. So instead, I created this one, and I've just rough ground it to shape because I need to etch up the surface because I'm going to reinforce this one further because this is still usable, perfectly usable. All right, so I'm going to infuse another couple of layers onto this, but we need multiple cores if we're creating a longsword this size to get that rigidity. It's not steel, it's not a homogeneous material. It's a bunch of different materials combined together that are trying to combine their different strengths to create a whole. And there are compromises that have to be made because of the selection of material here. If we were to go larger than this, if you want to make like a cloud sword or something, then you would change it up again because you would use something like a honeycomb core.
So with this one here, even though it's floppy and it doesn't have much structural rigidity here, is this still a usable, I would say, sword? Would it be able to cut through things? Would it still have enough strength in these planes?
If you put an edge on it, it definitely will cut.
The other option is to shorten it. Like if we took off that much, I reckon actually suddenly its rigidity would fall into a more tolerant kind of range.
I would say it would be in the larp range, which I'm not a fan of.
I would still like to test it out because you say larp, I say sharpen that up. It would still be deadly.
It'd still be deadly, yes. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it would still be floppy. It's still floppy down here.
But I've had steel swords. Okay, probably not as floppy, but not too far off, honestly.
That's why I say LARP. Okay, so what are the next steps for something like this? Because this was the first one you did.
Yes.
And you wanted to do a second one. Because one was
Yes.
supposed to be blunt, one was supposed to be sharp.
So-
For the second one, what would be...
And you are the expert here, so I'm really open to hearing what you would suggest in fixing some of the, some of the flaws that we have in our initial design to make it a bit more rigid while still trying to get it thin, because it's tricky. Like, swords will have a pretty strong distal taper, and that's what I'm thinking we probably will need. We'll need some type of ridge reinforcement, but then that will thin it out, because we would want the tip to be about this thick for about yay long towards the tip, around there, that range.
I don't think we'll lose too much of our cutting strength, even if we add just a little bit more thickness of core. I'd like to add about another 1.5 mil of storic core onto each side of this, and then probably another couple of layers of carbon fibre. The carbon fibre is holding everything together, but infused carbon fibre, we're adding the weight of resin more so than the carbon fibre. That core is going to give us a lot more rigidity without adding all of that extra weight.
And I love that. I really love that.
So,
And we're keeping it thin.
if you're going to be adding this extra ridge or this extra dimension, what would be, roughly speaking, the cross-section of the blade? Would it be a bit more, I think in sword terminology we use lenticular, where it's more like this? Would it be more
Diamond or...
Well, when we create this through the infusion process, and we're just going to do a flat infusion, we don't have a mold that we've made yet because we're basically in a prototyping stage. We're not mass producing this item. We could make a mold if we had a blade, for example. We can make a mold of it, but we'll end up with a completely square cross section. We can then grind that into whatever profile you want.
Which is really interesting, because that's very similar to having like a blank steel kind of blade that oftentimes, even historically, you would have blacksmiths that would just make blanks, send them to, either cutlers and other things that would then grind in the finer geometry.
So something I wanted to ask about here. Now, this isn't a knock on quality or anything like
go
that.
for it.
One of the big issues was actually inserting the blades in between the two sides of the mold. Here, for example, it's only a little tiny gap. That isn't the issue. It's more how off-center they are from one another. So if I was to grind an edge on there, then there probably wouldn't be anything to grind there.
It depends. Like, if you're centering it, what will happen is the edge would be a bit offside on this blade, and then offside on this blade. If we center it right, you would just get the edge traveling through and connect.
It would be way too thin.
It is a defect blade in many ways. So,
Well, this is the first prototype, but I think it's actually proving the concept really well, because this would still cut, and it's remarkably light, and it's also pointing out the additional changes we need to make it even more functional. And so this is really serving its purpose well.
What I mean by that is, obviously it would be better if we had a single piece of steel running both the lengths. Then we're not going to have that defect. Because we are using these pre-cut spring steel bars, is there a way to sort of mitigate this a little bit?
yes, so as we add thickness, because this has very, very little material on the underside holding that blade in place, because we wanted such a thin razor edge. Once we add thickness of material, you're going to have several millimeters now of material underneath that. That's going to provide a stable bedding for that material to sit on. So those blades should align a lot more precisely because of that.
Next question I have, right? Because I'm of two minds in terms of the length. This one I opted for greater length because carbon fiber is so light, reach advantage, and so that's the philosophy behind this design. And this would end up being a pretty darn big sword, like with the pommel and everything.
You get into Claymore war sword territory.
This is a war sword, right? It's no longer traditional longsword. We could shorten it and make it more in the traditional longsword length, and so you're not getting reach then, but you'll be getting speed. With how light this is, and you would be able to flip this around and fight with it, longsword style, in longsword length, super fast.
Do remember, it's all working towards the Titan sword itself, which is
Long.
very long. So I'm more interested in refining the length.
The length side of things. And then, because again, for a sword of this size, this is like dangerously light for a sword of this size.
And I think that actually will cause issues because you need some mass behind the cutting.
I am really interested to find out about that. You might be right, because you do need some weight. But the thing is, though, having it this size kind of brings that weight into the more functional range, because it's light for its size, but it's about as heavy as, what, an arming sword?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually. I was going to say a bit more bastard sword, but no.
I can actually tell you how heavy it is, if you want to.
Perfect.
And I can tell you exactly what sword it's.
So what? 1 kilo? Is that?
What's the best way to weigh this with the flop?
Well, we'll put something on here and we'll zero it out. So 500 grams.
500 grams.
That is half a kilo.
I think that's at 1,550 millimeters long.
Look at the size of this. Right, this is a war sword. Okay. Oh, look. After crossguard and pummel, it'll probably reach 700 grams.
It depends how
But
much.
even just a blank blade, this size, coming in at 500 grams, that's insane.
For context, something like a katana, usually around 1.2. Longsword, a little bit more than that. And then we're in the arming sword.
A blade of this size, that if it was out of steel, 1.5 kilos, easy. 3 times heavier it would usually be. So that's that's exciting. That gives me makes me giddy thinking about it.
Well, a lot of your weight in here is also in these sections of steel.
Yeah.
That you put in. They're about half the weight.
Because you're right, because the carbon fiber is already so light. Okay, so you think try and keep it in this size, war sword.
We'll keep it in this size, because then we can start to troubleshoot on the next one, or even on this one, once you add more to it, how we can fix up this structural rigidity issue while maintaining this thickness. Because you said you wanted to use a larger foamer core next time.
Yes, so with this one, I will go back. As I said, I put a rough grind on it because I need to etch up the surface. If I want to adhere another layer to this, which I will, I need to have something for the resin to bite into. But with the next one, which you guys are going to work on here today, so I'm going to give you every opportunity to make your own. What we're going to do is we're going to go thicker from just the outset, right? Because we want to have a very rigid blade and we want to be able to hold, like you said, this slight misalignment that's occurring because it's so thin at these edges, it's able to compress and move a little bit during the molding process.
For this misalignment here, it's not the biggest deal. The only issue is once we grind away and we put the bevel on and stuff like that, we're going to have nice sharp edges, and then when we get to the joints, there might be a little bit of a...
The thing is, though, in actual use, that's going to be barely noticeable in actual use, because when you cut, you're really only cutting with certain sections of the blade at a time. You rarely cutting along the full length where you would hit the misalignment and something might occur. So
that's true, but correct me if I'm wrong, that could create a fracture point to have a little...
It is definitely a weak point in there. But this material as a whole, it's pretty sturdy. It's got a tensile strength about 10 times what steel is for the same dimension.
Let's repeat that. A tensile strength 10 times more than comparable steel.
Yes, for a same given dimension.
Same given dimension.
But we do very stupid things with our stuff. So I'm just being honest here, you know.
So what you're suggesting, you have a sample here.
Yes.
And this is insanely rigid. Like have a feel. Like you can't convey how rigid that actually is. And so is this the kind of thing you're going for?
Correct.
Because that's crazy. Now, in terms of thickness, this is probably this is within tolerance of sword blade thickness, at its thickest point.
But
you wouldn't want it this.
That, so fine.
That's the other point. You wouldn't want it this thick at the tip, but you could get this thickness from the base up to about here and have the grind on either edge come down pretty nicely, and then the remaining, we would want to get it much thinner towards the tip. You can't convey how crazy rigid this feels unless you hold it and try it.
How did you make this particular sample here?
So that's one of my students made that one. But that is a single sheet of carbon fiber, a layer of soric core, another sheet of carbon fiber, another soric core, and then another sheet of carbon fiber. So there's only 3 layers in the entire thing.
A single sheet, not layered?
Single sheet.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Wow.
So what's soric core you're saying?
It's the type of foam core that we've used in that.
Core. That is nuts.
Again, composites each contribute a different part of the formula to this. So this particular core, you can tear it apart.
I mean, just the hex pattern makes it look so sci-fi. I love it. But yeah, like it's crazy. Composites are crazy. Like it's not that strong on its own, but combine it in the right way, you make something insane.
Well, that's why we have like this piece here. If you want to try and just snap that piece of carbon fiber,
There's no chance.
No.
Like have a feel of the resistance of that. Would that hold my weight?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's about the equivalent of a 3mm steel rod, what you've got there. And it's
In
only a
terms of
string
tension.
about 1/2 mil thick, yeah.
So crazy.
It's also incredibly heat resistant. I think
And that's a blowtorch on the carbon fiber.
it'll go up to about 1200 degrees with no issues, this particular material. So there's a lot of things we can do with it, but we're trying to combine these properties together. So I think for rigidity, what I want to do is essentially this, but adding a third layer of core, because you don't have a lot of width to play with. So we need to try and compensate somewhat in the vertical. And we can grind away what we don't need afterwards.
Yeah.
And if we wanted to, we could also, if you had an old sword or something, we could make a mold of it and do a perfect one-to-one replica down the line.
Yeah.
So what I'm thinking, especially where the blade sections are, because if I grab a couple of pieces of the blade, so by the time you've got a blade that goes all the way at the tip, and then I put one on the other side next to it, and remember, these blades do not provide any strength from top to bottom. They provide strength longitudinally, but vertically, they aren't helping with the bond between the two halves. So that is the core, this incredibly thin section in the middle. That is where we need to get our rigidity from. And to do that, that's not very easy. We end up with a sword that's so thin and so light towards this end that you're coming up with something similar to like those Indian spring steel whip swords.
Yeah, yeah.
And it will lacerate. That's very different to...
Something that'll hold its rigidity in contact with another blade.
Exactly.
But that's only the issue at the tip, really.
So
the further you go down, the more width you have.
So we can go a material that, this sort of length, and we're stiffening it up.
Yeah.
And by layering our material, so we might, when we do this infusion, we might do this on almost a taper.
Yeah.
So we'll build our first couple of layers and we'll stagger them. So each layer steps and overlaps a greater and greater amount to try and build that taper in from the get-go.
Just having your expertise on this is just so fun for me, because this is really engineering the most optimal kind of, or close to, way of executing this concept, this design. And it's going to result in something really fun.
Switching over to Titan Sword very quickly. So would something like this be usable for the Titan Sword? Because this thickness here, at least to me, doesn't seem unreasonable. About 3 meters long though. Is that...
It depends what you're willing to, like I say, if you want to make something like a cloud sword, right? Sort
Kind
of
of like
Final
the Titan
Fantasy.
sword is going to be about yay big, handle there, and then the blade is probably there to the ground.
2.5
by the way,
meters on the
because
blade.
the Titan sword's so big, we can go thicker towards the base. We only need to thin it out, and so...
But we're actually going to have a lot of...
You might find that something like a Nomex or even an aluminium honeycomb core to fill up some of that space and some of that rigidity towards the base would be quite handy. The problem with a honeycomb though is once we start adding a lot of torsion to it, all you have on a honeycomb is that outermost surface, that very edge to actually hold and bind the two surfaces together, which is quite weak. So again, there's compromises in this between, yes, we can make something very light, we can also make a submarine, with these materials. You shouldn't, because it's a tensile material, not a compressive material.
There's been a recent example of a submarine. Anyway, moving on from that, I think this kind of method sounds really workable for the Titan sword. Like, it's just so rigid and stiff, and we have the option of going another layer, going a bit thicker.
Well, there is one last little thought to that, and this is where I say, like, we make it more rigid, just like with steel. There is a compromise. And the compromise is
brittleness.
we're going to become slightly more brittle. When it does fail, it's going to be more catastrophic.
Okay.
Because the force, it's not being allowed to release through some springing, some deflection. It's going to be more of a snap at that point. But with carbon fiber, I think you'll find that unless the hit is incredibly hard and able to shear through the entire surface.
Yeah.
What you'll end up with is it'll shear through several of the toes and then stop, because the tensile strength is so great that even if it snaps the resin matrix, it'll be held together. It'll just be broken and a bit floppy.
I'm curious here because you've said that on this particular example, you have one layer of the carbon fiber, one layer of the foam core. Once we start grinding in a bevel to this, we're going to be grinding away that carbon fiber. Will that affect, for example, if we were to hit like an edge on another edge, is this stuff softer, the actual foam core?
It is softer and weaker because, and this is why we have to essentially build it up. Like I say, we sandwich it in between. So we need to cut strips of carbon fiber to go around the outside of it. Basically sacrificial carbon fiber.
Remember though,
Exactly.
the main material that's there to stop impacts is the steel.
Yes, Shaq.
We've doubled the thickness. This is 1 mil thick. That will stop a blade.
It will work for what we're trying to achieve for the Titan sword.
If
but
it's not braced just on a standard impact, this will stop a sword.
It will until you exceed the tensile strength of that steel. And once you hit that point,
Yes, you rarely reach that in standard sword use. If we brace this on something and just hammer down a sword, I think there's a chance to chop through it. I agree, right?
Yes,
But-
and we do that a lot.
But,
to be clear.
well, we did that with our test carbon fiber knife, but the steel edge was half the thickness of this. This is 1 mil thick. The other one was half a mil thick. And so this is going to have a much higher strength resistance to impact than what our initial test was. And so I think in standard use, the edge is actually going to be quite robust in sword contact. And this edge, the steel, will protect the rest of the material from getting cut into too much. And so that's why I think it's going to work quite nicely.
Just before we move on, you have some other materials here, and
Yes.
I thought you wanted to show us some
We
stuff.
will. There's one thing I want to mention before we jump to the other materials, because we're saying we'll grind out the profile. Because the plan is now to make it this shape thicker and then grind it in. And the best cross section for that is going to be diamond. Get as prominent a central ridge as we can, and you achieve that through the diamond cross section. So no fuller on this.
it might also be worth thinking about the option of making it wider.
Yes.
Because you can go wider on this, because within a normal sword, the biomechanics are very different for
And
the
it
human being.
adds a lot more
A lot of
weight.
weight. Exactly.
that wouldn't be too much of an issue because we're dealing with such a light material.
You're at half a kilo now. Even if I triple the material, you're only getting up to standard sort of weights.
I think we could go wider, and that would even look even cooler. Because wide swords, it's funny, fantasy.
18C, but just really.
We could, but like fantasy loves making wide blades, and they're impractical because they're too heavy. We could actually. The tricky thing is the tip. We have such a kind of a narrow taper here because the philosophy that we had was to get the tip, the blades kind of meeting here and then overlapping to get the tip. You were saying that does weaken it because we have smaller central point. So what we could do is actually make the whole blade a bit wider all the way through, and then do we have another, and then insert another blade tip separately to the edges. And that would make this part a lot stronger, you were saying.
Yes. And we should have enough material with what you've brought up. I can cut a couple of sections, say 100 mils off,
And just kind of
insert those on their own separate independent angle at the end.
Perfect. Let's do it. I love it. All right, so now you were suggesting we could also work with an additional material.
Yes. So my other suggestion was a slightly less rigid material, but that is Kevlar. So
Kevlar. Now, you showed something to me really awesome before. And so, Tyrant, how about you have a go at this?
So cut just a piece of this polyester core.
Anywhere?
Yeah, anywhere you like. Just get a feel for what it's like. They're pretty strong
Those
shears.
are strong scissors. Actually, those are probably the most serious scissors I've ever used in my life, like in terms of the strength and shearing force that's in them.
All right, we're getting caught up on the scissors. What's next?
But this is impressive. Now try and cut this. Like do one solid.
You can also, if you like, just slice at it a bit with the tip of the scissors. So Kevlar, famously used in body armor, military, helmets, but also used in things like bike riding, skis, because it's very, very abrasive resistant and very chemically resistant as well. Not as rigid as carbon fiber, so there's trade-offs there.
By adding this into the blade, that would actually add cut and shear resistance into the material, even separate to the blade itself. And there's a way that we might be able to get best of both worlds?
Yes, so in composites, we do things like, this is a carbon Kevlar weave.
Carbon, fiber, and Kevlar weave combined.
And the weight, I'm assuming, is negligible.
It's a little bit heavier than carbon fiber, but I mean, you can feel it. It's very similar. So I think especially in an armor application, but even just in this application, maybe even as a safety factor, once you get to the Titan sword, a layer of Kevlar probably wouldn't be a bad idea.
I love it. I love
just
that.
to resist
An
that sort
important
of...
question though.
Yes,
Does it come in red?
it does.
I'm
actually
sold
does.
then. I'm on board. Comes in red. All right.
And it looks very pretty.
Yeah.
Like, I'm on board with all your suggestions. I want to do it all. And so to try and summarize some of the things that we've been out workshop and in the back and forth is that we can probably go a bit thicker.
Yes.
Potentially 3 layers, you were saying, of this kind of foam insert. I forget the name of it.
Soric.
Soric.
And we are going to need to add a little bit more layers on the top and bottom so we have some grinding material.
Then making this actually a little bit wider as well. So it's going to be a wider blade towards the tip, maybe even a bit wider down the base. It seems like we're all on board on trying to make the same length, which is crazy. This is going to be a big sword. Now, I'm not opposed to, because I would actually like to just experiment with a more standard sized longsword with it being so much lighter. And so once we nail down this design, it wouldn't be too hard to just make a short version of it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh boy, so we have the plan. Now, it actually, we're here on site. James, you're saying we have the opportunity to try and make some right now.
Sure do. So I've got all these scrap bits, like I say, I have all these leftovers from the students this year. This would otherwise be in the scrap bin, these materials, but some of them are, you know, they're decent size sheets. And this one here, well, that's just a bit bigger, I think.
Look at that. Yeah, that's perfect. That is, oh boy.
It's a plain weave, and I've got another one in here, which is a bias weave. Bias just means that it's biased in one direction. So we're on an angle, but we're slightly over an equally balanced angle. And we're trying to, again, spread the load in multiple directions, not just 90 degrees.
All right, so yes, we have made the first prototype, though it's not necessarily complete. There's some additional things that we can do to make it more functional. And then we're also got better designs that we are going to be making while we're here. But to actually be part of that, to see us start making new versions of this, we're doing a video for our supporters and members. So if you want to see us actually make some of these newer designs that we have in mind while we're here, all you need to do is become a member. You can, channel memberships, support us on Patreon, Subscribe Star, or Player. $1 to $5 a month gives you access to all this behind the scenes content. And for this special one, us actually making the next, would you call it Mark II? Mark III version of this? But already, this is just it. So we haven't been doing nothing. We've been working on this behind the scenes. And James, mate, thank you so much. This is very exciting.
My pleasure.
Awesome. So guys, like I said, if you want to see us actually start to make it, become a member, supporter, you get access to it. Thank you for watching, and be excited because we are going to do it. A legit carbon fiber sword, right? That has Kevlar in it even. And it is going to be insane. This sword is going to be probably one of the lightest swords ever made that's functional, actually seriously functional. Stay tuned, subscribe so you don't miss out. Thanks guys, and we'll see you there.